The Blackwood Manor wasn't simply abandoned, it exuded a palpable hostility. The peeling paint wasn't just neglected, it looked like it had been clawed at in a desperate frenzy. The windows, black and empty, felt like empty sockets staring back at you. Even the approaching storm seemed to bow its head in morbid respect, as 19-year-old Sarah and her friends, Ben and Emily, huddled beneath the skeletal branches of the surrounding oaks. Sarah, fueled by a morbid curiosity that gnawed at her like a hungry rat, had disregarded the warnings. The legend of the Blackwoods, a family who vanished overnight decades ago, had always been a chilling whisper in their small town. Now, with Ben's bravado and a touch of teenage recklessness, they stood at the threshold of the manor. The rusty iron gates groaned in protest as Ben, the self-proclaimed leader, pushed them open. A putrid stench, a cocktail of decay and something far more unsettling, assaulted them. Moonlight, fractured by the boarded windows, cast long, skeletal shadows that danced with a life of their own. Every creak, every groan of the floorboard sounded like a tortured whisper, and the air hung heavy, thick enough to taste. As they ventured deeper, the temperature plummeted. It wasn't just a physical cold, but a pervasive chill that seeped into their very bones. Dust motes danced in the feeble flashlight beam, swirling like phantom souls trapped in their eternal void. A sudden, inexplicable flutter brushed against Sarah's cheek, sending a jolt of terror through her. It wasn't a moth, nor a bat. It felt like a skeletal hand, cold and dry, brushing a silent caress. They stumbled upon the grand drawing room, cobwebs cascading from the elaborate crown molding like macabre tapestries. Furniture, shrouded in dust sheets, resembled bloated corpses under a shroud. A grand piano stood in the center, its yellowed keys like decaying teeth. As Sarah approached, a single note, mournful and long, resonated in the deathly silence. It wasn't a sound produced by mortal hands. It seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the room, a chilling prelude to something far worse. Then they saw it. A figure in the tattered remains of a white gown shimmered near the piano. But gone were the womanly features. This was a grotesque parody of humanity. Her flesh clung to her bones like a tattered shroud, and where a face should have been, there was only a gaping maw, ringed with raw, exposed muscle. A single, sightless eye, milky white and cloudy, seemed to focus on them with an intensity that made Sarah's blood run cold. The stench of decay, amplified 100-fold, slammed into them, a thick, suffocating fog. The spectral woman, or whatever it was, released a shriek, a sound that defied description. It was a cacophony of tortured souls, a symphony of unimaginable suffering, a promise of something worse than death. The chandelier overhead, a tangled mess of rusted chains and cracked crystals, swayed violently, showering them with a rain of glittering glass. Ben, his bravado shattered, stumbled back, tripping over the debris. His scream, raw and primal, was cut short as a spectral claw materialized from the darkness, sinking into his chest with a sickening crunch. His eyes, wide with terror, locked on Sarah's for a fleeting moment before he was yanked into the shadows, his screams muffled by the unseen entity. Emily, paralyzed with fear, stood frozen, a silent scream trapped in her throat. Sarah, in a desperate bid for survival, lunged for a fallen candelabra, its jagged metal points glinting in the weak light. She thrust it forward, a pathetic weapon against the embodiment of horror before them. The spectral woman lunged, but the candelabra pierced its spectral form, a sound like ripping silk filling the air. It recoiled, a flicker of something resembling pain crossing its grotesque visage. Enraged, it lashed out, a spectral tendril whipping through the air. It caught Emily on the shoulder, tearing through flesh and bone like tissue paper. Her scream, mercifully brief, was swallowed by the darkness. Driven by a primal fear, Sarah scrambled towards the broken window, shards of glass glinting like malevolent eyes in the moonlight. She clambered through, the cold night air a brutal shock to her overheated skin. The storm had unleashed its fury, rain lashing down, wind howling like a banshee, but none of it compared to the terror gnawing at her soul. She didn't stop running until she collapsed on the side of the deserted highway, miles away from the manor. The storm raged around her, but it was the chilling laughter echoing in her mind that truly terrified her. As dawn began to paint the horizon with streaks of bruised purple and orange, Sarah stumbled into a small, all-night diner. The warmth and the smell of greasy bacon were a far cry from the horrors of the night before. She collapsed into a booth, shivering uncontrollably, her clothes stained with blood and reeking of decay. The waitress, a kind-faced woman named Betty, took one look at Sarah and ushered her into the back office. There, under the harsh fluorescent lights, the enormity of what Sarah had been through became even clearer. Scratches marred her arms, and a deep gash on her leg pulsed with a dull ache. But the worst was in her eyes, a chilling emptiness, a reflection of the horror she had witnessed. As Sarah spoke, her voice raspy and disjointed, Betty listened patiently. When she finished, Betty simply nodded, her gaze filled with a sorrowful understanding. "The Blackwoods," she muttered, shaking her head. "Some things just shouldn't be disturbed." Betty, it turned out, was a local historian, a keeper of the town's forgotten stories. She told Sarah about the Blackwoods, a prominent family plagued by tragedy. The wife, Margaret, had a fascination with the occult, toying with forces far beyond her comprehension. One stormy night, the screams from the manor had pierced the night. The next morning, the house was empty, a chilling silence replacing the cries of the previous night. Suddenly, the clatter of dishes made Sarah jump. A young man, Betty's son, Michael, stood in the doorway, eyes wide. "Mom," he whispered, there's a woman outside, all ragged and bloody." Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. Looking out the rain-streaked window, she saw a figure emerge from the trees, its form obscured by the downpour. But Sarah recognized it, the spectral woman, her single eye glowing with an unholy light. Panic seized Sarah. This wasn't over. The entity had followed her, drawn by the lingering echoes of its presence. Betty, however, remained surprisingly calm. She ushered Sarah behind the counter, grabbing a length of iron chain from beneath the counter. "Iron," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "It weakens them?" The diner door creaked open, and the spectral woman entered. Even in the dim light, the grotesque details of its form were horrifying. It let out a low growl, the sound vibrating in Sarah's bones. Betty brandished the chain, holding it aloft like a shield. The spectral woman recoiled from the iron, hissing in rage. A desperate struggle ensued. Betty, surprisingly strong for her age, swung the chain, striking the entity a glancing blow. It shrieked in pain, a sound that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. Taking advantage of the distraction, Sarah grabbed a heavy coffee pot from the counter. With a surge of adrenaline, she flung it at the spectral woman. The ceramic pot shattered on impact, scalding water splashing across the entity's form. It roared, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. The diner door burst open again, a gust of wind whipping through. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the spectral woman was gone. There was only an echoing silence, broken only by the sound of Sarah's ragged breaths. Exhausted and shaken, Sarah and Betty collapsed onto the floor. The diner, with its overturned tables and shattered mugs, looked like a battlefield. But they were alive. They had survived the night. As dawn broke fully, casting its pale light on the rain-washed world, the police arrived. Betty, ever the pragmatist, spun a tale of a robbery gone wrong, explaining Sarah's injuries and the disarray. The police, skeptical but lacking any real evidence, eventually left. Sarah knew the truth, however. The Blackwoods held a darker secret, a malevolent entity that would forever be etched in her memory. Leaving with a final, grateful glance at Betty, Sarah knew this wasn't the end. The whispers of the Blackwoods would forever haunt her, a grim reminder of the night she danced with death and barely escaped its chilling embrace.